government is corrupt. The political system is dysfunctional. Both political parties have not only failed us, they have betrayed us. We cannot trust them with our futures. We, the people, must take back control ourselves. Good evening. Welcome to the Revolution, and welcome to Revolution Television and Revolution Radio. My name is Lawrence Hebron. Now, for those who are going to be listening on Revolution Radio, take down this number. You'll have an opportunity to call in with questions a little bit later. That number is area code 347-884-9499. Again, 347-884-9499. If you're listening to this, if you're watching it, you won't have that opportunity right now, unfortunately. We hope to have that worked out here in future episodes where you can call in and ask us some questions. We'll begin tonight with our revolutionary look at the news. Headline: Another state joins the rebellion against federal tyranny. Last week, we reported on the rebellion going on in the state of Alabama against the dictates of federal courts regarding same-sex marriage. A federal court in Mobile, Alabama, ruled that the Yellowhammer State must join 36 other states and the District of Columbia in allowing homosexual marriages, whether they liked it or not, and they didn't. Despite the federal ruling, many counties thumbed their noses at the judge and refused to comply. Our response is, hoorah, good for you. As we pointed out, the proper interpretation of the Constitution clearly demonstrates that there is no right to homosexual unions, and it should be the state's right to determine if they are allowed at all. Well, the rebellion is growing, and not just regarding homosexual marriage. Two bills were filed this month by the Tennessee legislature to fight back against federal infringement of our Second Amendment rights. If passed, these new bills will change Tennessee law in very significant and positive ways. Here's what they say. The first one mandates that on or after July 1st, 2015, no public funds of this state or any political subdivision of this state shall be allocated to the implementation, regulation, or enforcement of any federal law, executive order, rule, or regulation regulating the ownership, use, or possession of firearms, ammunition, or firearm accessories. The second one says basically the same thing, but it applies beyond just funding. It says that no personnel or property of the state may be used for those purposes. But let me go ahead and read it to you so you'll hear exactly what it says. On or after July 1st, 2015, no personnel or property of this state or any political subdivision of this state shall be allocated to the implementation, regulation, or enforcement of any federal law, executive order, rule, or regulation regulating the ownership, use, or possession of firearms, ammunition, or firearm accessories. Among other things, these two bills would effectively block a proposed ATF ban on the popular M855 round for AR-15 and similar rifles. A recent notice from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF, although perhaps we should say ATFE. In typical fashion, this bureaucracy is growing like all the others. Well, anyway, this notice put us on notice that the feds are considering redefining the M855 round as armor-piercing. Now, armor-piercing rounds are regulated by the Gun Control Act of 1968. This new proposed designation for the M855 would allow the feds to ban or restrict the sale of this ammunition. The Tennessee law would negate that. Well, here in Tennessee, as in Alabama, we see states following a strategy essentially similar to the one I detailed in my book, AR2, Handbook for the Second American Revolution. Bold constitutional leaders, like governors and sheriffs, can refuse to comply with federal dictates if these dictates are unconstitutional. Now, the dicey issue, of course, is finding a device that allows us to interpret and define the Constitution accurately and authoritatively so that we can make our case against the feds stand. In AR2, I developed and described a principle called linkage, which provides this device. It is a legitimate and powerful tool for understanding and applying the Constitution according to its original intent. In effect, this is a thermonuclear weapon that can blow the progressives' specious arguments out of the water and out of our lives. Once a county or state has established a rightful justification for disobeying an unconstitutional federal mandate, whether it's based on legislation or a court ruling, it can simply refuse to comply. And if those states or counties have constitutional posses and militias at their disposal, they'll be able to back up their rebellion. In fact, the right to do what Tennessee is proposing in this new legislation has already been approved by the United States Supreme Court in a number of cases dating as far back as 1842. For example, back in 1997, our friend Sheriff Richard Mack was involved in Prince versus the United States. In it, Justice Scalia held that the federal government may neither issue directives requiring the states to address particular problems, nor command the state's officers of those of their political subdivisions to administer or enforce a federal regulatory program. In other words, the feds can't force the local governments to carry their water for them. And by the way, Tennessee is not alone in considering this type of action. Similar bills have already been filed this year in Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, Montana, Minnesota, Kentucky, Mississippi, South Carolina, and New Hampshire. Several more states are expected to do the same. Since 2013, Idaho, Alaska, and Kansas have already passed legislation that pushes back hard against federal gun control measures using a similar approach. And allow me to offer you yet another strategy which I recently recommended to a candidate for governor of the state of California. This would work brilliantly in states where there is a courageous constitutional governor, but which lack legislature that with the courage or integrity to pass the necessary legislation to buck the federal government. So here it goes. As you know, governors have the power of pardon. We usually only hear about this, using this power, when they're getting ready to leave office and they sign off on some midnight releases of their criminal buddies, releasing them from jail, or the criminal children of their buddies. Well, here's a much more constructive use of the power of pardon. The governor announces that he will issue pardons to individuals, organizations, and businesses which have been, are, or will be found in violation of any of the state's laws which infringe upon our Second Amendment rights. And then he specifically names these laws and what they cover. For example, in California, the regulation that you can't use a magazine that can hold more than 10 rounds. A governor could say, you know what, if you're ever convicted of that, I'm going to pardon you. Now, granted, this won't change the law, but it will change law enforcement. You see, district attorneys have the discretion to decide what they prosecute and what they don't. Well, what DA will waste his precious resources of time, personnel, and money prosecuting the violators of improper gun control laws if he knows that the moment the judge's gavel hits the bench and the judge says guilty, the governor says pardoned? Furthermore, he would probably instruct law enforcement agencies in his area to stop making related arrests because they'll only clog his inbox with cases he won't prosecute anyway. Okay, let's talk this over. Ian McDonald is with us again tonight. Welcome back, Ian.
Nice to be here.
Well, great to have you. And first of all, I want to know what you think of this action taken by Tennessee and a number of other states.
I absolutely love it. Nullification. When the laws are unconstitutional, just don't obey them. That's my thought on it. We need more of this. And I think that there'll be a lot of states that are going to be following this. Some states are already, you know, as you said, denying the funds from the federal government so that they can follow through on this on this technique. You know, this applies to juries just as it does to laws within the state, and it goes right into the constitutional sheriff, constitutional governor thinking that goes along with AR2 and solutions. When the law is unconstitutional, just don't enforce it.
Well, I agree with that, certainly. But isn't there some danger in allowing the states to all plot their own course on such matters as this? I mean, we could end up going in 50 different directions and have chaos.
I don't agree with that at all. I think that the states are smart enough to figure it out on their own. In fact, most of them are running more efficiently than the federal government is, for sure. You know, and this typically only applies to conditions where the laws are unconstitutional. And it also really shows just why states' rights is so important. And I've said this to several people, you know, when you live in a place, in a state, and they begin to take this unconstitutional path in their thinking and in their laws and the way that they make laws, you at least have the ability to leave that state and go to another one that does respect your rights. When the federal government doesn't respect your rights, where do you go? The only recourse that you have is a state that is willing to raise a middle finger to the federal government and say, absolutely not. I will not accept this.
Well, I think the progressives would be quick to point out the danger of chaos of having 50 states going in 50 different directions. But I think we have to look at the danger of the alternative. And the alternative is increasing concentration of power in smaller and smaller places, namely the federal government, and the danger inherent in that. And we're going to have we'll always wrap up with some quote or quotes of the day. Well, we've got some good ones, so stay tuned till the end of the program because you're going to hear some really, you think we're talking revolution. Wait till you hear these and who said them. Well, there are always problems with any kind of course of action, and we shouldn't allow us to be talked out of them just because they're not perfect. But how do you think we can avoid the problems inherent in the independent exercise of states' rights? You talked about states' rights, and I agree. But there are some inherent problems. What can we do to avoid these problems?
Well, the number one thing that could avoid all of this in the first place, and that's for the federal government just to respect our rights in the first place. You know, they have the ability to do it right. And most of the time through history, they have done it right. But now we have a situation where states are even wanting to secede from the nation. We haven't heard that since the 1860s. Why are they wanting to do that? Because they don't trust the federal government to do it right anymore. So they're saying, you know what, we're going to do it on our own.
And the number of states that are considering that, at least have some kind of movement in there, and the number of people who are considering it is surprisingly high. Now, I would agree, and I think if we simply have a clear and universal understanding of the original intent of the Constitution, and we adhere to it by the states and the federal government, that would eliminate the problem right there. As you said, through most of our history, we haven't had this kind of problem because we did adhere to the original intent. In more recent decades, there's been this concept floated that the Constitution is a living document. People have done the same thing with the Bible, saying it's a living document. It's one of the best ways to kill something is to say that it's a living document, because what that does is open the door for all kinds of false interpretations. So if we just have a clear understanding of what the original intent of the Constitution is and follow that, we won't have these problems that we're talking about. And that's what linkage is all about. It is a very powerful tool and a very simple one. You don't have to have a PhD in political science. All you have to do is be able to understand basic language, and you'll understand what linkage is all about, and you'll see how it gives us the tool we need to clearly interpret, understand, and apply the Constitution according to its original intent. Well, getting on to a little bit different, well, a related topic, I offered a suggestion regarding the use of the power of pardon to reestablish lost Second Amendment rights. And by the way, it doesn't just apply to Second Amendment rights, but it's, I think, very good in doing that. What do you think of this suggestion of using the governor's power of pardon to reestablish our lost rights when they live in a state where those rights have been infringed upon?
I absolutely love it. That's a home run, in my opinion. I mean, that is the one thing that the governor can do. And again, it's the same type of approach that you see that the Obama administration is using currently with their end run around all of the court rulings on the Second Amendment. The courts have said over and over and over again that we have the right to keep and bear arms. So what does the government do? They don't like that, so they turn around and try to ban the ammunition. Well, this is right back at you. Right back at you. We're not going to tolerate it. And you know what? That's exactly why people have been stockpiling ammunition, which I'll get into a little bit later on.
I agree, and I think, too, that this is something you really can't argue about. You might argue with the governor for doing it, but you can't deny that he has the power to. Nullification is one of those principles, and I agree with it, but it's one of the ones that, you know, is debated and is going back and forth. You cannot debate the fact that the governor has the power of pardon. It's just out there. You might debate what he uses with it, what he does with it, rather, but you can't debate that he has it. And he can use it to basically get rid of all those laws that infringe on our Second Amendment rights. Well, we talked last week about the revolt in Alabama against the same-sex legislation and rulings that being forced down everybody's throats by the federal courts, and we showed how that is not constitutional. It seems that the revolt is growing. So where might this lead, and is this a good thing or is it a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing, and again, I think if nothing else, what it does is it brings up the conversation. People in the states are going to have to start talking about it, and it's an uncomfortable subject that they might find very difficult to talk about. But when they do this, and these other states follow, you know, I think the count is somewhere up around more than half a dozen states right now that are taking this approach, and when they do, they're going to force the conversation. And it's going to force the government, the federal government, to explain their actions and to stand up and take a side one way or the other. And then we know where we are. We know what we've got to do.
Well, moving on to our next topic. Are you a violent terrorist? Are you? Do you think you are? Well, your opinion may be different from what the government thinks. And so Ian has a report for us right now on that, and we'll be discussing that when he finishes up this report. So Ian, are you a violent terrorist? What does the government think? The answer to that question is.
Well, I think the government probably does think I am a violent terrorist, but let's take a listen. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall be most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Those are the words so eloquently penned by Thomas Jefferson that declared our rights, that declared our freedom from the tyranny of the British government. With those words, our founders presented King George with a raised middle finger. They told them, "You do not own us. We are not your slave. You will not control us. We are free men. We bow to no king." Our founders were willing to wage war against the most powerful military on earth to secure their freedom. Some might ask, what does the Declaration of Independence have to do with modern life? What does it have to do with the year 2015? Well, it is the foundation of our law. Without that, we would not be a nation. Without that, we would have no freedom. The Declaration of Independence was just that. It was the declaration of our independence. We became a government. We became a nation. But yet we still had no law. Laws had to be formed. The Constitution was written in 1787 to state the powers of our government, to state the roles of our government and what they can and cannot do. The Constitution sets the boundaries of our government's authority, the boundaries of its power. The Constitution lays out how it will exist, how it will operate, who has what authority, what it may do, what it may not do. We declared that the people are sovereign, The people make the rules. The people appoint leaders to enact laws. In a letter written to James Monroe in 1791, Thomas Jefferson stated, "Natural rights are the objects for the protection of which society is formed, and municipal laws established." Being that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and was also instrumental in the writing of all of our founding documents, we must ask, what did he mean by our natural rights? Well, our system defines there are two types of rights, natural rights and legal rights. Legal rights are those bestowed upon a person by a given legal system. Natural rights are those not contingent upon the laws, customs, or beliefs of any particular culture or government, and therefore universal and inalienable, rights that cannot be repealed or restrained by human laws. What Jefferson was saying is that we will permit government to enact laws to protect our natural rights. In 1791, Thomas Paine further elaborated on the concept of natural rights in his works The Rights of Man, emphasizing that rights cannot be granted by any character because this would legally imply that they can also be revoked under certain circumstances, that they would be reduced to a privilege. The states, in fact, declined to ratify the Constitution initially because it did not adequately define these rights and set boundaries upon which the government could not encroach. It was this argument by the Anti-Federalists that brought James Madison back to the pen. He set forth to document these natural rights, the rights of man, our natural rights, the rights of the people that could not be infringed upon by government. The Bill of Rights are widely recognized as the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which are as follows. Amendment 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Amendment 2. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. Amendment 3. No soldier shall in a time of peace be quartered in any house, without the consent of the owner, nor in a time of war, but in a manner to be described by law. Amendment 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall be issued, but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the places to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Amendment 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject to the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Amendment 5. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have a compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Amendment 7. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Amendment 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel or unusual punishment inflicted. Amendment 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. It does not require a Harvard legal scholar to see that these rights delineated in the Bill of Rights are a guarantee of those rights to the people. They are a restriction on government, not on the people. They are not the rights of the government. They are, in fact, the rights of the people. In the Bill of Rights, there is a combination of legal rights and natural rights. We have a natural right of thought, of expression, to speak our mind, to choose the religion that we want to follow or not follow. We have a natural right of self-defense, of defense of our family, of defense of our property. We have a natural right of security in our home, of our property and our effects. We have a legal right against illegal searches and seizures. When you look at the Bill of Rights, it is obvious there is a delineation between these natural and legal rights. At the top of the list in the First Amendment and in the Second Amendment, there is a reason why these are first and second. They are our most fundamental of rights, our natural rights, our rights as humans. We have the right of self-defense. We have the right to defend our family. This is our most basic human core existence, the right of life. It is with these rights in mind that I make the following statements. Our legal system is founded on the presumption of innocence. We are presumed to be innocent until we are proven to be guilty of a crime. Yet, in today's society, it seems perfectly acceptable that we must prove our worthiness to exercise our rights. Why is this? I must apply for a permit to carry a gun. In essence, I must apply for a permit to exercise the right to defend my life or the life of my family should the need arise. This is counter to our system of government. It implies that I am not worthy and therefore must have permission. This is unacceptable. I have the right of self-defense. This is a natural right. It is codified in our legal system, in our Constitution. In our legal system, just because a majority of people want something, just because a law is enacted, does not necessarily mean that law is constitutional. We have many laws that defy constitutional logic. We have many laws that are blatantly unconstitutional. Yet the only way that we have as a recourse to overturn those laws is to first challenge them in court. In order to challenge them, a law such as concealed carry, I must first put myself in a position where I am arrested. Then I have standing to challenge the law. Without being arrested first, I have no standing. The Constitution is my right to carry, period. Today, as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, is marching across huge swaths of land in the Middle East, crucifying, beheading, burning alive untold numbers of human beings, and making direct threats against the United States. In the news just today, a new video from Al-Shabaab, an Islamic terrorist group of Somali origin, shows the terrorist group calling for the attack on the Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota, which also happens to have a very large population of Somalis. These are the self-appointed brothers of the Islamic nutjobs that attacked the U.S. on 9/11. The mall is one of 3 similar targets the group specifically names, including West Edmonton Mall of Canada, the Oxford Street shopping area in London. The video shows 6 minutes of graphic images and the terrorists celebrating the 2013 Westgate Mall attack in Nairobi, Kenya, that killed more than 60 people. Yet to listen to the Obama administration, Islamic terrorists are not of any concern. Have you noticed that the term violent extremist has replaced the decades-old war on terrorists? The present administration can't even call Islamic terrorists what they are and what they call themselves. I have felt for some time that the reason for this new change in the terminology is that Obama views patriot Americans as more of a threat to him than those beheading people in the name of Islam. As a patriot, Obama, I was in uniform defending the country while you were pimping Marxist socialist ideology in the name of constitutional law and calling yourself a community organizer. You were doing this at the very time I was standing toe-to-toe with the Soviets in the Fulda Gap of Europe overlooking East Germany. In a new intelligence assessment circulated by the Department of Homeland Security this month, focuses on domestic terrorist threats from right-wing sovereign citizen extremists and comes as the Obama administration holds a White House conference to focus on the efforts to fight violent extremism. You may notice that a new term is emerging, missing the word Islamic. The new term of the day is right-wing sovereign citizen extremists, which is also commonly associated with the word violent, and often in the same sentence. The Obama administration has a history of choosing its words very carefully. I believe it's covering over the term that they used in the last DHS report that classified the following as potential terrorists. While largely omitting Islamic terrorism, the report failed to mention the World Trade Center bombings. The study focused on Americans who hold beliefs shared by the vast majority of conservatives and libertarians, and puts them in the context of radical extremists. The report takes on its definition from a 2011 study entitled Profiles and Perpetrators of Terrorism, produced by the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, in which the following characteristics are used to identify terrorists. Americans who believe that their way of life is under attack. Americans who are fiercely nationalistic. People who consider themselves anti-global. I assume they mean those who are weary of the loss of American sovereignty. Americans who are suspicious of centralized federal authority. Americans who are reverent of individual liberty. People who believe in conspiracy theories that involve grave threats to national security and personal liberty. And the list goes on. Christians, vets, pro-lifers, Mormons, Jewish extremists. I assume they mean Jews who don't want to be victims of another Holocaust. People who stockpile food and medical supplies and ammunition. Gun nuts like those who believe in the Second Amendment. And of course, those constitutionalists. So what are they telling you? They're telling you that they view you as the enemy, not Islamo-Nazis, who are beheading people in the name of their religion. You, my friend, who call yourself a Tea Partier. You 5 million members of the NRA. Yeah, to you, the Justice Department sees you as a terrorist. You know, all those groups and organizations targeted by the IRS, yeah, you're terrorists too. You folks who stockpiled away any food or provisions for that earthquake, yeah, you're a terrorist, even though the government told you to stockpile that food. So yeah, Obama, I'm a sovereign citizen, an American, a free man protected by the Constitution. I'm armed to the teeth because of the founders foresaw tyrants like you. And they ensured that I have the ability to maintain that freedom. What you are too stupid to see with your free Ivy League education is that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you attempt to take away my rights, the more willing I am to fight against you. The more my government views and declares me a threat, the more I become one. It's clear to me that my government now views me as the enemy. I was willing to fight and die for this country. You spent millions to train me and make me a warrior. I may be old and gray, but my oath to the Constitution has no expiration date.
Well, very well said, and I would certainly like to back up what you've said with by emphasizing a couple of points there. First of all, about the source of our rights. You talked about natural rights. And this isn't just a theory. It isn't just something that Ian's talking about. This is something that our founders all believed universally. In fact, break out a copy of the Declaration of Independence and read it. We had to justify to the world and to history why we were doing what we were doing. And we said we were entitled to rebel against Great Britain because they were violating our rights. That we were entitled by, as they put it, the laws of nature and of nature's God. Look in the Declaration. That's exactly what it says. The laws of nature and of nature's God. We are entitled to those rights by the law of nature and nature's God. And you see, if you put it on any other basis than God himself, then your claim to rights is just somebody's opinion. And that somebody might change his opinion. Or the person offering the opinion might change. So your rights might be one thing today, a different thing tomorrow, and still something else the day after that. There's no stability there. So our rights are rock solid. If they're anything less than based on the laws of nature and nature's God, then we can't depend on them. Second, a little bit later, not too far, toward the end of the second paragraph of the Declaration, it says that we are entitled to alter or abolish any government that becomes destructive of these ends. Now, what ends are they talking about? They're referring to what they said governments are all about just a few phrases before. It said governments exist to secure these rights. That's what governments do, to secure these rights. That's the most solemn, and since the responsibility comes from God himself, remember, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that is a solemn and sacred responsibility. The first responsibility of government, to secure these rights. And if a government fails to do that, we are entitled to alter or abolish it. That's how important these rights are. And now, for this redefinition of terrorism that is being fostered by the Obama administration, talking about us, we who are patriotic, as terrorists, veterans, Christians, people who cling to their Bibles and their guns, as I think the president used to say. Well, when patriotism becomes terrorism in the eyes of the government, then I guess we all have an obligation to become terrorists, at least by that definition of the government. I think we also need to ask, and if I can use this, I've said these things to really back up and to reinforce what you were saying, and I think that was a beautiful piece and speaks very, very clearly to our rights and what we need to do to defend those rights against the threat that's being posed against them. I think the next question that I'd like to go as we take a step beyond that is this. If the government has come to define us as terrorists today, what can we expect from them tomorrow? What are they setting up to do? What do you think, Ian?
Well, I think that that's a very plausible explanation of why we're looking at billions of rounds of ammunition being purchased by the government and also the Department of Homeland Security. What I see coming down the roads, frankly, scares the hell out of me. It's the last thing that I want to see, I can tell you that. But I think that we're headed for some very, very bad times in this country. And I think that there is a point where the people are going to say, enough is enough. I will not take this anymore, and they're going to do something about it. And in our history, when that's happened in the past, it's not a good thing. The end result may be good. I hope it'll be good. But unfortunately, I don't see any other recourse when we have a government that has no desire to protect those rights anymore. What's the old saying? When you have when When the government fears the people, you have freedom, and when the people fear the government, you have tyranny. I think we're very close to that equation right now.
There's a lot going on now that's very scary. You talk about this being frightening, and it certainly is. I want to pass on a story right now, a very brief one, that addresses this, and I can't vouch for it. I'll tell you right up front, I can't vouch for it. This is a gentleman that I met most recently again at a gun show in Southern California. I was talking to him. This is a matter of several months ago, and he was telling me about, we had a booth there, and carrying on conversations with people about how they can support and defend their rights, Second Amendment rights, and all the other constitutional rights to which we are entitled. And he told me about a meeting he had very recently with a friend of his, a Native American down in Arizona. He said he was visiting with this friend for a few days, and they were out walking around, and the Native American pointed out to him, I'm avoiding names here, I don't get anybody in any trouble, but he pointed out to him, he says, you see that military truck riding down the road down over there? And it was a 6x, the kind that the United States Armed Forces use, pretty much all the one that has ground forces. It had its war paint on, all camouflaged up. And the gentleman I was talking to said, yeah, I see that. And he says, well, the next time you see it, it will be painted black, and it will have very large letters UN painted on it. Well, he said about 2 days later they were out walking around again, and he doesn't know if it was the same vehicle, but it was the same type of vehicle, painted black, with very large letters, UN for United Nations, painted on it. Now, what are we doing that for? I mean, even if our vehicles were not being painted black with UN on them, why are UN vehicles running around in the Southwest, headed north to where allegedly there are FEMA relocation centers? And I'll tell you, I've talked to people for whom this is not an allegation, they've seen it. There are some very, very dangerous things going on. And again, if all of this sounds very radical and scary, the things that we were proposing here about fighting back, about the rebellion, if this sounds scary to you, again, stay tuned for just a little bit longer, and at the end of the program I will have some quotes for you that are even more firm than this, and pay attention to who said them. So Ian, any more on this before we move on to our next segment?
Well, I think that mostly covers it. Again, we have, as we reported on last week, we have 120,000 federal law enforcement officers in this country. 120,000. That does not include all of the state and locals. We really need to start asking the questions why we need this and what are they for. I think that if you take a really close look, we have more SWAT teams per square mile of population than any other nation on earth. Why is that? Is our crime problem that rampant that they can justify this? I don't believe it is. I don't believe that they can justify it. And what it all comes down to in the end, in my opinion, is about power and control. Those seeking power, those trying to maintain power, and those trying to bring power back once they've lost it. That's a continuous battle between the D's and R's of who can be in power and who can be in control. And typically, who are they trying to control? Who are they trying to regulate? It's not the government. They're not trying to fix their problems. They're trying to fix us. And they don't seem to have any regard whatsoever for the Constitution in their approach. So I hate to say it, but I think that we're headed towards very dark times.
Well, thank you for that report. And as we wrap up, before we make the transition into our next segment here, I'd just like to repeat something that you said a little while ago, because I think it is a very good way to conclude this. Where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fear the people, you have liberty. I think it's about time for us for we the people, to put the fear in the government again. Well, thank you, Ian. We're going to move on now to our next segment, This Week in American History. But we here at Revolution Television and Revolution Radio do believe in American exceptionalism. We are proud of our country, and we do want to encourage a reconnection with our proud heritage, a remembrance of America the Great. And so a regular portion of our program each week is to review events that happened in history on the dates of this last week. So let's go back to February the 18th. February 18th, 1735, Flora, or Hob in the Well, became the very first opera performed in America. The performance took place in Charleston, South Carolina. 1841, the first continuous filibuster in the United States Senate began and didn't end until March 11th, 21 days later. 1885, the great American novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, was published. 1977, the Enterprise, the first space shuttle, took its maiden flight, actually it was a test flight, secured to the top of a Boeing 747. The Enterprise, although they called it a space shuttle, would never go into space. It was just used for test purposes. Moving on now to February the 19th, 1807, former Vice President Aaron Burr was arrested in Alabama on suspicion that he had schemed to establish an independent republic. Now here's your trivia question for the night. Do you know who was the president when Burr was the vice president? Thomas Jefferson. Remember, he was in a tie with Thomas Jefferson, and that tie was broken, and Jefferson became president, Aaron Burr became the vice president. They had different rules for selecting presidents and vice presidents back then. Continuing now with February the 19th, 1847, the first rescuers reached the Donner Party that had been stranded in the snow of the Sierra Nevada mountains. 1878, Thomas Edison received a patent for the phonograph. 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order authorizing the internment of Japanese Americans. All kinds of mischief in those executive orders, wouldn't you say? 1945, 70,000 United States Marines began the epic struggle for the Pacific island of Iwo Jima when they began landing the landing force that morning. So here's another extra credit question for you. What does Iwo Jima mean? Before you look it up, before you Google it, I'm going to tell you it's Sulphur Island. Sulphur Island. February the 20th, 1792. President Washington signed an act creating the United States Post Office. 1809, the Supreme Court ruled that the power of the federal government is greater than the power of the state government. Kind of expected the federal court system might decide something like that. 1862, Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie, died at the White House of typhoid fever. 1942, Lieutenant Edward O'Hare became the Navy's first flying ace of World War II when he shot down 5 Japanese bombers headed for the USS Lexington. And in 1962, Marine Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. February the 21st, 1848, former President John Quincy Adams suffered a stroke on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, where he served as a congressman. He died 2 days later, remaining in the House building, and you can still go and find that site where that all took place in the House building. 1878, the first telephone directory was issued in New Haven, Connecticut. 1885, the Washington Monument was dedicated. And in 1972, Richard Nixon became the first president to visit China. And now, moving on to February the 22nd, 1732, George Washington, the Republic's indispensable man, was born in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He would later serve as the only commander of the Continental Army, the president of the Constitutional Convention, and the first president of the United States under the Constitution. 1819, Spain ceded Florida to the United States, giving an opportunity for retirees to have some place to go in their golden years. 1879, Frank Woolworth started his first 5-cent store in Utica, New York, beginning a retail revolution. 1924, Calvin Coolidge delivered the first presidential radio broadcast from the White House. 1980, the U.S. hockey team upset the Soviet team 4-3 during the Winter Olympic Games at Lake Placid, New York. February 23rd, 1836, the siege of the Alamo began in San Antonio, Texas. 1847, U.S. troops commanded by General Zachary Taylor defeated Mexican General Santa Anna at the Battle of Buena Vista. 1861, President-elect Abraham Lincoln arrived secretly in Washington, D.C. because of reports of assassination plots. 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt signed an agreement with Cuba to lease the area around Guantanamo Bay to the United States. So our involvement there goes back to 1903. 1945, United States Marines fighting on Iwo Jima raised the American flag atop Mount Suribachi. The iconic photo of the event was actually the second flag raising on the peak of Suribachi. 1954, 5,000 school children in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania received the first injections of a polio vaccine developed by Dr. Jonas Salk. And February 24th, 1803, the Supreme Court made its claim to be the ultimate interpreter of the Constitution in the case of Marbury versus Madison. The Constitution doesn't actually say that. But again, you can understand why they would want you to believe it. 1868, Andrew Johnson became the first president to be impeached by the House of Representatives. Bill Clinton was the only other president to be impeached. Both would be acquitted by the Senate. 1871, the South regained full representation in Congress since the beginning of the Civil War, when the Georgia delegation was installed. In 1991, the U.S.-led coalition began the ground campaign against Iraq in the Persian Gulf War. And that is this date in history. Well, if you're as concerned as we are about what's happening in the country and are looking for an opportunity to really make a difference, and by really make a difference, I'm not talking about the Republican or Democratic parties, then we might suggest you look into the American Eagle Alliance, and you can view this on our website, aea4usa.com. This and other material as well will be available. The American Eagle Alliance is leading the charge in fighting the Second American Revolution, AR2. Among other things, we conduct Patriot Training Days that will teach you and your organization how to fight and win the Second American Revolution in less time than it took to win the first, without taking over the White House, the Congress, the Supreme Court, or any constitutional amendments. In 1776, we the people rocked the world. It's time to do it again. This is not a rehash of tired old failed ideas from Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, left or right. This is vintage American. This is historic and heroic. This change everything. If you'd like to schedule an event for your area and its Patriot organizations, just call 909-913-7878. Again, 909-913-7878. Or if you'd like me to come by and discuss any of the ideas in Solutions, Guidebook for Rebuilding America the Great, or AR2, Handbook for the Second American Revolution, you can schedule that by calling that same number, 909-913-7878. In both those books, Solutions and AR2, are available in bookstores, but probably the easiest and cheapest way to get them would be through a distributor like Amazon. Just search under my name, Lawrence Paul Hebron, Hebron. And people have asked, are they available in bulk? Yes, they're available in bulk, and bulk rates are available for you. Again, 909-913-7878. Well, tune into Friends of Liberty Radio on other days to hear archived episodes of Revolution Radio and some other programming as well. And come back again to our website and tell your friends, aea4usa.com, That's the number 4, AEA, the number 4, USA.com. And you'll be able to hear this and other programming as well. Well, we like to wrap up with some quote, usually a quote of the day. Sometimes we get so excited that we just can't contain ourselves, and we have quotes of the day. And this is one of them. So I've been kind of teasing you about that for a little bit. Now you're going to hear them. So if you think Ian and I are revolutionary, listen to these guys and listen to who these guys are. When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. Thomas Jefferson. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Benjamin Franklin. There is danger from all men. The only maxim of a free government ought to be to trust no man living with power to endanger the public liberty. John Adams. If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude than the animating contest of freedom, go from us in peace. We ask not for your counsels or arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains sit lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that ye were our countrymen. Samuel Adams. This country, with its institutions, belongs to the people who inhabit it. Whenever they shall grow weary of the existing government, they can exercise their constitutional right of amending it or their revolutionary right to dismember or overthrow it. That revolutionary enough for you? You know who said it? Abraham Lincoln in his first inaugural address. And what country can preserve its liberties if its rulers are not warned from time to time that this people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. The remedy is to set them right as to the facts, pardon and pacify them. What signify a few lives lost in a century or two? The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. Thomas Jefferson again. And finally, if we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve inviolate those inestimable privileges for which we have been so long contending, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have been so long engaged, and which we have pledged ourselves never to abandon, until the glorious object of our conquest shall be obtained, we must fight. I repeat it, sir, we must fight. An appeal to arms and to the God of hosts is all that is left us. Patrick Henry, right before he said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Well, that's it for tonight. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends they can listen to archived episodes, and we hope to talk with you again next week on Revolution Television and Revolution Radio. Now, let's get cracking, patriots. We've got a country to save. Good night.